So welcome to Planning and Zoning and Planning Commission for the 3rd of December. We will start off tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance, and if I could have the audience please rise. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First item on today's agenda will be approval of the minutes for November 5th. Before we do that, I need to introduce a new member of our commission. So Brad Wilkinson, thank you for accepting the nomination from the mayor and joining our team.
Appreciate the opportunity, thank you.
So we'll teach you as we go. It's kind of a sink or swim method. Okay. But we'll throw you a life preserver. That's how I learned.
All right.
Unfortunately, I drowned before I swam, so we're good. But anyways, welcome to the team. Excited to have you on board. So today we will look at the minutes for our last meeting and take a quick look at those and see if there's anything on there that stands out as needing adjustment. So Tracy or Bruce, have either one of you had a chance to review those and have any suggested changes? If there's, the only thing we need to make sure on that one is just the wording about special, how we had the special meeting, how we pass it. So does that motion sound right? And
yeah, I think so.
Okay, so if you see any issues, do we have a motion to approve that?
We got both weeks, right?
Yeah, we got to do one first and the other one. So this will just be the November 5th.
I'll move that we approve the minutes from November 5th, 2014 as written.
We have a motion by Commissioner Fallon.
And I'll second that.
Since you're the only other one, will you second that one, Commissioner Tagg? Excellent. And so we have a first and a second, and we don't need to do roll call votes on approvals. So we will move on to November 18th. Just to tell the public, we had 2 in November. We had called for a I don't know, refer to it as special meeting, but I refer to it as a second meeting to do the, to discuss the items at hand. In reference, it was specifically the Woodbury development. And if there's anybody that has any changes or suggestions to the second meeting we had on November 18th. We have a motion to approve the minutes as are for November 18th by Commissioner Tagg.
Second.
And we have a second by Commissioner Fallon. And we will, since I'm the only other one, normally we would ask if anybody opposes that, but since I'm the only other one, then we won't do that. Is that all right with you? All right. I have to check with our legal team here. So the first item on today's agenda will be a Title 15 zone proposal for the Hillside development. We understand that the DRC had requested that it be continued, but Mr. Anderson, if you'd like to take a minute, just kind of get us up to speed on the Hillside development.
Yeah, we had it scheduled for a public hearing tonight, and we had what I think was a very healthy discussion today. We've had some other discussions about some standards that we think are very important for us to adopt. We've learned quite a bit about the potential dangers that I think exist today relative to development in certain parts of the city. Largely, we're fortunate that most of the soils throughout the community, I think, are better than other parts of the valley. We don't generally have a lot of areas that have a lot of topographical change and steep slopes and things like that, but we do have some. And we want to make sure that as we work with future developments, we're handling things the right way. The event that happened in North Salt Lake this past summer It wasn't a real big eye opener for us. We knew that kind of potential existed, but I think it really helped us realize the urgent need to get some standards adopted. So you have draft language that frankly I don't think will probably change a lot over the course of the next few weeks and months. We do anticipate meeting with the company that, I guess as I see it, they're kind of on retainer for us as our geotechnical expert firm that we use to review a particular type of engineering plan to make sure that people are using best practices and that type of a thing. We'd like to get them more involved in making sure that the standards really are a best practice for us. So with that said, tonight we'd ask that you continue it, but if there's anything you'd like to talk about, if you have any questions or suggestions, we'd certainly love to do that as well.
Is there anything the commission would like to ask of the staff to consider in their DRC that perhaps has not already been discussed, or, be just kind of a proactive approach to asking the DRC to discuss?
I didn't expect there probably to be a lot of discussion, but
I'm not up to speed on this. Is this a liability protection for the city in drafting this? Is it an ordinance that you can only build on certain slopes and the ground has to be so stable and all of that stuff? Were people successful in Salt Lake in suing the city?
well,
Or where they've had, hillside problems and?
right. That, of course, remains to be seen in the case of North Salt Lake. I suspect that situation will probably drag on for quite some time. As a general rule, if we simply follow the rules that are in place for us, and we don't go out of our way to take on additional liability, we're relatively well insulated from lawsuits and that type of a thing. We have to really be egregious, I think, in making mistakes as a municipality to put ourselves in a position where we're taking liability on ourselves. But we're very, very concerned about private property. We have one development in the community. It's the Oak Ridge Cove development up around the pressurized irrigation reservoir that we have there. And there was some construction that happened this summer as property owners were cutting shelves into hillsides to construct homes on, where we were very alarmed as a staff. Adjacent property owners became alarmed with some of the things that happened there. And incidentally, the timing of those things happening here just happened to line up with what happened in North Salt Lake. So it was a number of things that happened all at the same time. But at the same time, one of the things that I noticed in looking at our general plan here recently, 4 or 5 years ago, we noted one of our goals in our general plan, which is kind of our long-term marching orders, as the need to adopt some additional development standards. And we don't anticipate as much that they will necessarily limit development potential more than what we have today. That is to say, people probably still could develop with standards like these adopted, the same properties as what are allowed right now. But there would be a higher level of scrutiny involved in making sure that individual home sites are simply safe to build on, and in making sure that something that property owner A maybe doesn't adversely impact somebody's property, maybe either upslope or downslope from it, and some different things like that. Of course, with different engineering techniques, you can potentially address a lot of different concerns. And I think our primary goal here is simply to make sure that things happen in a safe way. So.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions, I would entertain a motion to continue this until the DRC is able to make a recommendation to us.
So moved.
So,
Do you need us to repeat that, Cameron? Okay.
So a motion by myself, second by Commissioner Fallon. Anybody opposed to that? No opposition. With that said, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Stillman zone change proposal. This would be a public hearing. First, we will hear from staff. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. The properties outlined in red there are what are being proposed for this zone change. You can see that the properties are east of Maple Mountain High School, between First South and Fourth North. There is a gap between 2550 East and these properties, and we'll talk more about that in a second as we talk about preliminary plat proposals that involve these properties as well. The Stillman annexation was approved by the City Council just a couple of weeks ago. So in fact, it's actually still going through the formal recording process, and we don't anticipate there will be any issues with that actually being recorded. But at the time that the property was annexed, originally the applicant had asked for R112 zoning to be assigned to the properties then when they were annexed, and we felt like it was more appropriate to take things incrementally in one more manner. So with the annexation, the properties have been assigned rural residential zoning, which allows for lots that are at least 5 acres in size, nothing smaller than that. And simply for us, that really is kind of a holding zone. We don't anticipate that people likely will subdivide properties like these into 5-acre lots. That simply is a zone that we use as kind of a tool in between the time that properties get annexed and when they actually develop. Well, in this case, while we were reviewing the annexation, we also started reviewing preliminary plat applications that the applicants submitted. So we finished up the review of those actually just last Wednesday. That's the reason that the reports came to you guys just yesterday instead of last week like we typically try to do. And I'll talk more about the subdivisions in just a minute. But relative to the zone change, again, right now the properties are zoned rural residential, and the request is to change the zone from that to R112, which basically allows for residential development on lots that are 1/4 of an acre in size, or at least density that's kind of on par with that, about 2.5 units to the acre. That particular zoning is consistent with our general plan, which identifies this area as being appropriate for low-density residential development, which the density there in terms of units per acre that we spell out in our general plan is 1 to 3 units per acre. Actually, take it back, it's 1 to 4 units per acre. So it's consistent with that. Of course, that's probably the biggest guide that we use when we talk about zone changes. Another thing that I think's important to note relative to this area, I brought it up when we talked about the annexation several years ago with the city council that was in place then and the commissioners that were on the planning commission. We talked about different areas that are around the city, areas that at that point in time hadn't been annexed, just relative to where should growth occur. And we were looking then, I think, on about a 10-year horizon, so we're probably more than halfway through that right now. We talked about this area here. We talked about part of the river bottoms, Leland. We even talked about the prospect of development maybe happening on the other side of I-15. And in short, as we laid out 5 or 6 different areas, really with the idea then that we likely had a finite amount of capacity in our wastewater treatment plant. And since then, we've kind of addressed that issue, but that was kind of what spurred the discussion. We were concerned about where to allocate sewer connections. Where should development occur? What's the most functional area around the city for us to kind of promote growth to happen in? And in short, this was the #1 area. The vacant, yet to be annexed lands between Spanish Fork and really the railroad tracks that are over there, which eventually will be the boundary between us and Mapleton. So I mentioned that just by way of some background, that for me has been useful, as we've talked about these properties developing and others in the area, because I think we've already kind of concluded as a city that this is probably a good area for growth to occur in. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the specific development proposals that we have here. Incidentally, we have a growth boundary that's intended to kind of also help guide development. That was amended several years ago to include these properties as part of that discussion that we had about encouraging growth in this direction. So with all of that said, kind of the last piece of the puzzle for me relative to zoning the properties for the kind of development that we'll talk about, more than the general plan designation and just kind of the rationale for how growth should happen in an orderly fashion. A very important consideration for me when it comes to zone changes is, are we ready to provide utilities to subject properties? And frankly, I think for a long time, the fact that we have a pretty significant offsite sewer project that's needed for these properties to be developed, and there's a pretty substantial power project that needs to be funded and constructed to make these properties developable. That made it very difficult for them to develop individually. You can see now that some groups have assembled a few properties together. I think that's kind of allowed them to get the critical mass that they need to be able to justify those off-site improvement expenses. And as the applicants were able to prove to us that they have the wherewithal, they're able to proceed forward to provide utilities for these properties, I think that's really what indicates to us that this is the time to do it. Again, I think regardless of the general plan designation, if we can't serve the property for development, then I think it's probably premature to zone it that way. But in this case, I think we're at the point, we talked a little bit about that with you guys when we talked about the annexation, to where the properties can be served with city services. And with that, the Development Review Committee has recommended that the zoning be changed to R112.
Any other questions for staff? No? At this time then, it is a public hearing. I will, without questions for staff, I will go ahead and turn this over at this time to open up for a public hearing. I ask that if you do come up and approach the commission, that make sure you state your name and purpose. At this time, it's open. Is there anybody who would like to come say hi? There we go.
Dean Ingram, I'm actually the applicant, although I'm not Atlas Engineering, but I am the applicant. We're excited to be, it was hard to put everything together to make it so we could do something in that area. There are a couple challenges with that, but we feel like we have that ability with what we have assembled there and with that annexation you guys already approved. So I know there's a couple other, maybe 3 other properties that are either under contract or close to under contract in the same area, which is again going to help the whole area out there with that off-site sewer and off-site power, as Dave mentioned. But if you guys have any questions, I just want to introduce myself and feel free to ask. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Dave, I do have a question in regards to the zone change to R112. Is this, I guess, the feeling that these other users are going to, or not users, applicants potentially are going to want as well? I mean, obviously, until they come to the table with proposals, it's easy to do, but I just don't want to have a situation we've had in other parts of our community where we have a geographical area, like this whole area with multiple zones in a certain area. So even though we're specifically talking about this, is this the plan for this whole area eventually?
In my view, it is, but that, I think, is largely for you guys to weigh in on as well. Given the fact that, I just want to think for a second here.
Does it meet the requirements with, I was reading the minutes, and Jared, you just spoke to, but with electricity and power and railroad and streets, and does the R112 meet our total objective?
In my opinion, it's the best fit for the area. All of the properties that have been approved for for development west of these properties, you can see there are some still that have either the rural residential zoning designation or even just an agricultural designation there. But as we've approved developments in the area, for the most part, it's been just the R112 zone. And that, I think, is partly from discussions that we had, even going back, like I said, years into the past. So I would expect that the majority of these properties would be zoned R112.
Follow suit.
When, for example, with this property, they come in to have an individual project approved there and here, et cetera, as we go throughout kind of the rest of that part of the bench over there.
Okay.
But, again, that's something for you guys to weigh in on as well. You can see here that when these properties were annexed, they requested that R115 zoning be assigned, which is kind of more on par with third-acre lots instead of quarter-acre lots. That was the request that they made. That was what the city council approved in that case at the time of annexation. And that certainly consistent as well with the general plan. But so far, really all of the development has happened with that R112 zoning designation.
Okay, thank you. So we're still open for a public hearing, but if there's nobody else that'd like to address the commission, go ahead and, nobody else, I'll close the public hearing at this time and then continue on with comments from the staff. So Jared, got a question for you in regards to roads. You had the other plan up there a minute ago, and I know it's not necessarily a plat approval, but just want to verify that there's no concerns with roads and connections in regards to the R12 with you.
No, not at this time. This will actually come out on 400 north of home. It'll have some effect on 2550 east, but we're off in this.
And that's my only question about R112 is I was looking at more of a density that wasn't quite more the third, the R115, just because of the infrastructure that's up there. I would be more inclined to fully approve it, and I'm not saying I'm denying it, I'm just saying fully approve it without any hesitation if Fourth North was more developed at this time,
Right.
2550 East with more time. I just feel like we keep putting this density into an area that our city's infrastructure is not ready to support yet. Now, we all know that we've taken surveys and Fourth North surveys and from the county, and they say that it will just because of peak times, but I'm just concerned with the amount of density we're putting in there and the infrastructure that doesn't support it.
Personally, I think that's the right perspective to have. We have to consider the impacts on an area, and in this case, we're talking about 150 homes that would be built if the zone change gets approved and plats get approved and the development happens. That's going to generate a lot of trips. We've talked a lot, as you know, about concerns that we have with 2550 East, the 2550 East 400 North intersection, and now we've even talked about First South and some concerns that we have relative to that, and some changes that would be, in our opinion, would need to be made if developments get approved here. I don't want to muddy the waters, but I think it'd be helpful maybe as part of the zone change if we talk a little bit about the development proposals. And I guess for me, what my perspective is now on the ultimate impact that these projects might have on the area. And I'm, I guess, really feeling like, and I think I've said this before, sometimes with the problems that come as we start allowing residential developments to happen in areas before that have just been farmland. We end up with some piecemeal deficiencies in roads. That's really, I think, what we're talking about. Areas where maybe we don't have sidewalks that kids can use to get to and from school. Intersections that, they don't meet the typical standards that we'd like to see intersections designed at. And typically, there are periods where those deficiencies are a problem, but occasionally development helps solve those as well. And I think this is, I'm hesitant to say this because I don't have a crystal ball, but I think in this case, the development of these properties could help lead to solutions faster than if they don't happen. If the power, for example,
Cart before the horse concept.
well, you're right, and your guess is as good as mine. But once sewer service is available here and the power problem is solved, then, for example, this property here becomes very, very easy to develop. Very easy to develop. And with the development of this, I think half of the most problematic frontage that we have on 2550 East, you know, kind of the remaining half across from Maple Mountain High School, gets improved. Now, simply because I don't foresee the property owner to the north probably doing anything much sooner, even with the utilities available. I think it's less likely that this property here would develop, but certainly having the facilities available, it's going to accelerate to some extent this property's development. And that's the only way today that things get better. Even with these developments remaining vacant, should that happen, Mapleton is still issuing building permits. And those kids, high school aged kids, will somehow get from Mapleton to Maple Mountain High School.
Yeah, but the density, they're on acre lots over there still, in some cases 5-acre lots. So
Right.
yes, they're building permits, but at a fraction of what we are.
I think that's very fair to say. And again, I agree with where you're coming from, but we can also talk about legacy farms.
I was just gonna ask,
700 homes.
how does this tie in across the street?
And Jared, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, but in short, this intersection we know will be improved at some point in time. Ideally, it would be improved when this property develops. We understand this property owner today really doesn't have interest in seeing it develop. So I wouldn't be surprised if the city, as we've done with other areas, you know, we may, and it's not may, if the improvements aren't made before the next round of asking for federal funds to make improvements, we'll apply for what I guess just I'll call grant money again to improve that intersection. We did it this past year and we weren't selected for funding on that project, but we'll continue to do that unless something else happens sooner. But again, our mechanism for having road improvements constructed is development. We don't typically, as the city, and shouldn't even say typically, we don't build roads in advance of development. We don't have funding to fill in gaps even. When those things do happen, it's because we've petitioned for either state or federal funds to use to cure those deficiencies. But you know, with all that said, I think it's a judgment call. At what point in time do you say no and stop approving development? But certainly if development is halted, then I wouldn't know how 2550 East is ever going to be improved.
What's this road right here, the new address here, what's this one, Jared?
130 North.
It almost seems to me, I mean, the developer would have to redesign and maybe lose a lot or something, but it almost seems that this 130 North should come all the way up and dead end and just give it
Got kind of a unique facility with these really big power lines that run right through here, which
but if there's not poles there, you can go underneath them, right?
you could. At the same time, if we look at 130 North west of here, I wish there was more of this to it. I think a lot of the residents that live adjacent to it feel the same way.
It just seems like our master plan should be with a thought process of eventually acquiring this.
Oh, and it is.
The word acquire is probably the wrong word, but as this develops,
We anticipate that these properties will develop, and we want there to be excellent connectivity from what we'll talk about tonight here and those properties when they develop. So we'll look at the preliminary plat for this and see that there are 2 streets that are designed to connect into the properties here from this development. We anticipate that as well. There could be a connection. Yeah, is anybody getting nauseous yet? We can finish you off probably. Brad, I think your point's excellent. We want that connectivity there. I simply don't necessarily think that it's best to have a straight shot, a perfectly straight shot.
I just kind of visualize kind of straight ahead and then kind of right into this subdivision and left into this subdivision, but it still works. It just,
Many different ways exist to skin the cat,
Yeah.
right? You could do it.
well, it's unique and it's different anyway, so get away from our square grids we have.
Yeah, I'm
So a
not sure
question I have, we're sitting here, and maybe it's just me, I'm not speaking on behalf of my teammates here, but I'm sitting here thinking maybe R15 versus 12, but realistically, until we did the math, you're probably looking at, 10 different homes maybe, 10 less homes? I don't know how many is here without counting them. How many homes are in this? 55? So if you went from a 12 to a 15, you might lose 6 homes, somewhere 7 homes, I don't know.
maybe closer to
10? But really, so our average in Spanish Fork is 4.2 trips per household or something like that?
It's a little bit higher than that even, but
Is it?
yeah.
So 50 trips is not going to make the difference of this road folding or not folding, I guess what I'm saying.
And one thing that I appreciate about this, and at least where we're at relative to staff, our recommendation is that if plats get approved for these 2 developments, that this connection here has to be made before there are more than 50 homes in those developments combined. In my opinion, 2550 East really isn't a big problem now for vehicular traffic. I think it'd be great to have a pedestrian facility, a sidewalk along there. It's the intersection of 400 North and 2550 East probably that's the biggest problem. So having this connection here would at least eliminate what I think is a pretty dangerous movement of vehicles from this project entering 400 North, making a left-hand turn, just with the conflicts that you have there with the travel speed on 400 North and that type of thing. They'll instead have this as an option to get into a good portion of the community, both the high school and the elementary school. I think this will really help alleviate traffic from that 400 North, 2550 East intersection, which
So the county's going to allow, how many entrances off of 4th North are they going to allow?
the state, Jared, if we go
Is it
back.
4th North County Road?
State road.
State road. So,
And you're right, they control that meticulously. They're very concerned about access.
and you feel that people will turn here and come through the community into the school?
Instead, I think that these people here will not go out onto 400 North to the 400 North 2550 East intersection. Instead, they'll use that route and avoid that intersection there, which is the problem. I think that's a step in the right direction. Still, traffic there will increase.
But
Homes
150
will be built in Legacy Farms and Mapleton and elsewhere. So this is, it's maybe some small help in terms of this project here, but
100 South's an interesting one, just because halfway up it becomes, right here, halfway up it becomes out of our boundary. So, we only have half of it, but yet they developed this. So you got 2 different cities there dealing with the development of 100 South.
yeah, we deal with that all the time where it's Spanish Fork City up to a point and then it's Utah County. And you're right, this wouldn't change, I would guess, until these properties here develop. At that point in time, it becomes a Spanish Fork City issue. We would require frontage to be improved according to our standards. To talk about this development here in First South, like I mentioned, we're somewhat concerned about this piece here. The school district has improved their frontage adjacent to the Maple Mountain High School. There's an elementary school not far off of our photo here to the west. And we simply want to make sure that there's a safe sidewalk route for kids going from this development eventually over to the elementary school. So one of the recommendations that we've suggested that you consider in terms of the Canyon Vista Estates plat, which is this one here, is that the applicant be required to improve that frontage there along with their own frontage adjacent to their project. That include curb gutter, sidewalk, and expanding the road, just to make sure that particularly kids, I think, going to the elementary school have a sidewalk to walk on there. Now, there are some other things about the plats that I think we probably should talk about. I don't know if you want to do that now or if you want to deal with this zone change separately.
Let's deal with the zone, and then, but I do want to have some plat discussion as well.
Okay.
So, any questions from the commission as far as the zone proposal change recommendation to an R12?
I think it seems appropriate based on what's been developed around there, so I don't have any issues with
That
it.
falls in line with what other stuff is. Well, it seems like if there's, at this time, no other questions in regards to the Stillman zone change, do I hear a motion by a member of the commission?
I'll make the motion that we approve the Stillman zone change from an RR to an R112.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tagg.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Commissioner, your first one, Wilkinson. And anybody oppose? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So before we move on to the preliminary plat next for Maple Mountain, let's go ahead and discuss a little bit of the, it's not on the agenda, but you were talking about the plat, so just a discussion. One of the things, Dave, if I could ask for, on the Stillman zone change, you were asking about the plat. It's not on the agenda now, but I didn't notice, it seems like the master plan for trails, we might consider that as legacy farms is developed. I know that the master plan for trails seems like it's going to come all the way up, and we might, somewhere that trail system is going to come all the way through and over, and I don't know if that's been included in these plats.
Yeah, that's a really big deal, and I hate to speculate too much about one thing. I'll go ahead and do it. Jared's turning the trails plan on now, I'm guessing. Right, am I in your way? But in short, part of our plan is to use this big power corridor that potentially is a great connection throughout that area, all the way up through Legacy Farms. There's nothing else you can do with it, for one. We'd much rather see it improve somehow. We even think there's potential in having parks constructed adjacent to it along the corridor. We have talked a lot about the need that these two developments will generate for a park on the east side of 2550 East. I know our Parks Department is working now with specific property owners in this area in the hopes of being able to buy land for some parks. And frankly, I think that probably will come to fruition. And if it does, they'll tie in very nicely to what we can see here, this trail corridor. Yeah, so the developments that we're talking about, it's this property and these. So we'd have a trail here. Trails planned to go on the east side of 2550 East as well. And how about even to the north, Jared? I don't remember exactly how that would go. Up through here, frankly.
Maybe our trail, we'll have a trail on, or collector.
And, it might seem redundant even to have trails as close together as they would be if we have this one here and something through here. But I really believe that at some point in the future, again, just because this is gonna be vacant, this might be 50 years down the road, but the power lines will still be there in 50 years.
But that's why we're called planners, is so we can look ahead and make sure we're not making decisions today that'll affect tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I could easily see the trail continuing all the way through that part of the community on Rocky Mountain Power's corridor. Right here, that's what we have planned, as it impacts these properties directly, so.
Does anybody else on the commission have any comments as they're moving? I'm sure we'll see this back on the agenda shortly with the plat
That's
approval.
what these are right here. Those next two items are the plat.
The next two on them are there?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I was jumping ahead. Hey, there you go. It's on
He
there.
was planning for
It was planning. I was looking at the agenda and didn't realize it was the same ones. There we go. Never mind. I'll
Yeah, so
shut up.
again, with R112 zoning here, this meets the city's criteria for master plan developments in that zone. That means that the development's underneath the density limit that we have for the R112 zone, but yet the applicant's been able to exercise some flexibility in terms of how lots are designed. We've requested the applicant make a few different changes to, actually I think it was more the Canyon Vista Estates design before tonight than this one. Again, that's part of the reason that you just received materials yesterday. But in short, with the current configuration, like we see here, staff recommends that Maple Mountain Estates be approved, subject to the fairly lengthy list of conditions that we have in the staff report. Most of those have to do with infrastructure in one way or another. We already talked about our belief that this road needs to be constructed fairly early on, as these two properties are being developed. That's probably the biggest, well, aside from the power need and offsite sewer, that's probably the biggest offsite improvement that we think you should make a specific condition of approval to address. Again, with the offsite power and offsite sewer issues being resolved, we don't have any issue recommending that these projects be approved, subject to those conditions that we have in the staff report.
I was just reading through the minutes, and Jared, you had made a comment about Street 2 and Street 5 connecting. Was it those two?
We removed the utilities out of this street. There's no real reason to have the connectivity or to maintain the utility in that street. In our ordinance, we do have a block connection ordinance, I believe, Dave. So we looked at this and we felt this was the best idea. So it's a road that's between two streets that won't be heavily used, but the connectivity needs to be there. If we remove this road, then you have, we measured about 16, 17, 1,800 feet before we get to an intersection. Wow. We just adopted an ordinance. It was walk length, I think it's 600 feet.
Which is still big. So,
Any comments or questions from the commission on the preliminary plat approval? There are quite a, how many are there? Nine conditions. We probably should just double check that there's nothing you would like to add to those conditions, or if you agree with each one of those before a motion is made. On number 5, where it says the developer adopts standards for consistent fencing throughout the development, do we want to, I mean, I guess it's probably not necessary because it has to be approved anyways, but just in line with our, because we have a new fence ordinance that we added to the general plan, it has to be offset and all that, but I mean, it's not necessarily have that in the verbiage, is it?
That's there regardless of the condition, so I don't think we need to do that.
Conditions 6 and 7 are tied to each other. Am I understand that right? I mean, basically, for condition 7 to be fulfilled, condition 6 has to be as well, right?
Yep. And basically, I think condition 6 exists simply to explain to the applicant that we expect them to build this, but to clarify as well that if they build it and the property to the north develops, they'll get reimbursed for part of that, so. And in reality, there certainly is a chance that the city might need to use eminent domain to obtain some right-of-way there so this can be built. And at least the discussion that we had in the DRC meeting, I think, indicated that as staff, we feel like that quite possibly would be appropriate to be able to make that connection.
So these two subdivisions, in essence, provide 3 points of access as they are currently constructed until future development occurs. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
There could be a couple of additional connections onto 2550 East as these properties develop,
Right.
but probably not any more than that. So we really do want to limit access to that road to some extent, so.
Further down 4th North in the Sunny Ridge development, there's a wall that we required on 4th North right here. And in this minutes here, they talk about a retaining wall on the railroad side, but what about the 4th North side? Is it specifically called out?
It is, yeah, that's part of our standard. So when people develop frontage on a road like 4th North, and I don't remember if that now we call an arterial road or,
North Virginia Arterial Road, 2550 is a collector road.
so on roads where we limit access, we do require a masonry wall to be constructed, a certain kind of landscaping to be installed. We'll require some trail improvements there as well. I don't want to say similar to Sunny Ridge because I think we've really enhanced the design from what was in place when Sunny Ridge's frontage was developed. So it won't look like that, but the masonry wall will be part of those improvements. The discussion that we had in the Development Review Committee meeting really had to do with the railroad tracks. And here we'll have homes within, maybe 100 feet of the actual tracks themselves. That, in my view, is somewhat unavoidable as we continue to see this part of the community develop. But we do want there to be a barrier between those homes and the tracks that has some permanence, that's going to be substantial, it's going to last, it's not going to be easily damaged. Given the topography there, unfortunately, I don't think that a wall is going to do a lot to help screen sound and things like that from the homes. But just relative to keeping people safe, we think that wall is very, very important.
Can I ask I'm not very familiar with this particular area of the city. We talk a lot about this intersection, but in terms of the funnel effect, I mean, as you continue down 4th North, does that continue to be adequate in terms of its functionality? Same with 1st South as it comes down. I mean, I know this part a little bit better than I know that road, but I know once you get down to that bridge over, we always know it. Obviously, know it's an issue, and so I think this exacerbates it, and we don't often talk about the bigger picture. We look immediately around the development, but so is that the cut bridge? Is that what it's called?
Cut Ridge here.
Right.
Plans are in place to have that improved.
We're meeting tomorrow with you. We've got the plan and hand meetings been done with PC&E. We should be moving forward and have that out to bid this spring. It'll be construction this summer.
Good. That's helpful, thanks.
It'll be a 5-lane bridge too.
We have a transportation master plan. In fact, we adopted some changes to that here just, I think, last month. And that's really the guiding document that we use to define what improvements need to be made at different intersections over time. We generally don't start to think about making those improvements until level of service starts to fall, et cetera, et cetera. But we do account for properties like the ones we're looking at now, developing in a certain way in accordance with their general plan, as we project what improvements are going to be needed over time. So even though we haven't done, for example, a specific traffic impact study with these plats to identify what their specific impact might be, and sometimes it's intersections that are a long ways away, if they develop, we have given it some thought. And it is part of a model that we use to predict what improvements are going to be needed. Not so much when, because that's really driven by when currently vacant areas have a change of land use and develop either residentially or commercially or some other way. But you can see different improvements here, everything from a traffic signal at the intersection that we're talking about, and others throughout the community, things that don't exist now, but we know will need to exist in order to accommodate the traffic that will be generated as projects like this get approved and constructed.
Any other questions from the commission? And is anybody ready to make a motion on the Maple Mountain Estate?
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of the preliminary plat based on the findings that are outlined in the staff report and also with the same conditions that are listed 1 through 9.
I'll second that. Any opposed? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We will now move on to the Canyon Vista Estate. Again, it's the property adjacent to it.
A lot of the same issues exist here. We've already touched on some of the things like our feelings about the need to improve some off-site street frontage here. If you've read through the minutes from our DRC meeting last week, you'll see that we asked the applicant to make a few changes, and those have been made with this design that we're looking at right here. We asked that this connection over to this area be moved a little bit. We asked that this road alignment be adjusted a little bit and some different things like that. And that's why you'll see that the conditions that the DRC made and the ones that we're recommending that you consider tonight, they're a little bit different. Several years ago, the family that owns this property here donated this to the city. Land that is encumbered by Rocky Mountain Power's easement. So Spanish Fork City now owns that land. And again, that's partly why we think it's going to be part of a trail corridor going through that part of the city. Also, it might be part of a park if some properties adjacent to it happen to develop that way, if we're able to obtain that. So we wanted to make sure that there was the prospect for a substantial connection to be made from this neighborhood over to that. We admit that, again, our crystal ball sometimes isn't perfectly clear. We think that there may at some point in the future be a need to have a street connection, through there. There may not be, but feel like it's appropriate to have enough land set aside by the applicant so that it could either be a street or maybe just part of a park and part of that corridor.
Trail access.
Exactly, yeah. So that's another one of the changes that the applicant made. And by and large, I think, as proposed, with the conditions that we have noted in the staff report, I shouldn't have said by and large. I mean, with the changes that have been made and with the conditions in the staff report being met, staff recommends that the plat be approved.
I think we're pretty much the same conversations as the last one, a lot of similar issues. I think the other one was addressed to access point to 2550 and 400, or this is 2550 and 100. So just kind of the opposite way. Any other concerns?
I have a couple of questions, Dave. It seems like, it looks like it's the same conditions in terms of this road here
Right.
on both applicants. So, I mean, is it the same applicant that's submitting on these two preliminary plats?
It may be the applicants can answer that.
Okay.
I don't believe it is.
So I just, how does it work where both applicants, if they're separate applicants, have the same condition?
From our perspective, there's one tally. That's how I envision it working.
One what?
One tally,
Okay.
so up to 50
Tally
homes.
ho.
When you
One,
say up to 50, you're referring to both, a total of 50 or 50 in each?
both. For example, with this project here, we will allow for up to 50 homes to be built on a single access. So their access initially will be here. And that'll be their only point of access, I think most likely, until this one gets constructed. So,
Dean has something to add to that, Dave.
well, okay, yeah, and I think it'd probably be good.
I guess we just have a question as regards to the conditions with the 50 homes and the access there, where the conditions are on both plats.
And we discussed that, and it's two separate parcels that may not be developed by the same person. So I think when we discussed it, it was because we could do 50 on an access point, we could do 50 on the top one and 50 on the lower one. It was actually, when we discussed the DRC, I think it was separate. I remember asking that. Only because how would you control if it's two separate, who's ever building?
That's our concern, is that the conditions are the same on both, but yet I could see this person here saying, well, that's not my issue, I don't have my 50 built, and this person's saying, well, it's not my issue because I don't have my 50 built.
But if you
So
would have
who's,
this access point,
well, I agree, I understand that. Okay, you got this access point here, and this person has the access point on Fourth North, so you become a stalemate in the middle.
We're actually gonna start in the northeast corner of ours,
Okay,
so that will be. that
all right up here,
No, on the lower one.
okay, right here.
So that's where my first phase
You
is.
guys mind coming up here?
I'm sorry.
I just feel that it needs to be, I think it needs to be separated more in the conditions, is what
So
I'm saying.
here, I hadn't understood that, Julie.
Okay, yeah, we switched to, we are now, phase one will be up by Street One. So that will be phase one.
With this street here being
No.
constructed?
No, with that, where am
We're
I
gonna
at?
try and get this connection
Am I
first.
there?
Okay, which
With
makes it
that
a
going in
non-issue.
first.
If
So
that
this will come in
That's what I
first,
said. They can-
Okay.
and this will be my first phase right here.
because it
So-
may be separate. See, and could be a problem, just trying to stave off a problem in the future.
Well, and I guess we're just looking at, even your comment a minute ago, what you proposed to DRC is different than what you're talking about now, it sounds like.
No, what he's
so with
saying, the
DRC,
DRC
This connection came up, and this is what we're securing right now, and I think that's the direction that.
But according to these notes, the DRC is referring to this as your primary access point.
Right.
So, but the upper road connection was a condition of DRC. The upper road was new at the DRC meeting, those are the changes we made, kind of right before that meeting, as we discussed with engineering for what they wanted to see, connecting that up over to 2550 and to attach to the current road at 130 on the other side on that. So once that happened, if that's a requirement, we want to put that in, and what changes for
What's the relationship between the two developments?
completely separate
we're
owners,
working together.
but we're working together.
Which is, I like that, but I'm just saying at some point, I'm trying to figure out,
Right, if they connect this road here and this road here, they'd have their two connections, they'd have to build this lot, or this development reaches 50 homes and this development reaches 50 homes. If they've not connected this, they have to connect this over, is what we're saying.
What I'm saying is who's responsible for it, though? I get that. Who's responsible? They.
The developer.
So they're friends now, and if something happens, I mean, they see, it's not spelled out. That's my concern.
It'll be whoever goes first.
Whoever wants to build their 51st home.
Right.
That's it. They'd be stuck at 50.
That's the kind of
In all honesty, I'd understood it
Okay.
differently though.
I think it's a stalemate.
So that's why the condition's worded the way that it is.
So I just have a quick question, though. I mean,
Okay.
did you say your name was Julie?
Julie Smith.
I mean, Julie just said that her intentions are to get that road.
That came from.
I mean, I'm just wondering, do you, and I mean, it's probably not, I don't know if it's our concern or not, but, I mean, is that gonna become a concern between the two of you to do that? Are
Well,
you
we
just
have
gonna
so
do it?
many issues. We
Okay.
have power issues, we have sewer issues.
So you're
we have
just happy
street
to
issues,
get
We have to
we
work
have-
together on all of that.
Yeah, we have so many issues that's just a very small part.
'Cause I think that's all that,
And I think the way I caught it now is, like you said, if developer A builds 50 homes here and developer B builds 50 homes, whoever decides, okay, I'm ready to build my 51st home, they are then responsible for putting that
Or
in.
doing it together.
Or doing
which
it
is
together,
most
yeah.
likely what's gonna happen.
Yeah. So either one of them, you're hamstrung.
Which-
And if it's really that important to do it, then you're gonna get it done for that 51st home.
There's actually a person working on 2550 that's also working with us, that I believe has that property tied up
You're talking about
right there.
this property,
Yeah, so
okay.
that has been all laid out, and we're all working together.
That satisfies me on this.
I'm just wondering if the wording of the conditions is as well as this.
Clarified in this meeting.
Somehow it has to be separate. Do that. but-
Somehow Dean wants it to be separate. I mean,
Well, 'cause
I've looked at it differently.
If somebody goes in there and just,
If somebody
you can
builds
build 4
50,
homes,
then-
You know what I mean, the one develops, you're
Right.
trying to make the numbers work on building homes and carrying ground and lots and stuff, and if it ends up being 2 separate builders, how do you, really makes it awkward, well, I'm gonna go turn in a whole bunch of permits, or, whatever that is, so.
Well, all the time, people have to do off-site improvements before
Right.
they can build a single house. So yeah, it certainly could work. Frankly, I don't have real strong feelings about this, particularly if I rather say if the developer of this property is going to start here, and that's what they really want to do and intend to do, then it's a non-issue. But I
But
would-
plans change too, so.
Very well said, yeah.
I would like to see it, instead of a number, a phase. I mean, we've seen that on other preliminary plats where the completion of phase 1, the improvements have to be made before they can go to phase 2 or something versus a number.
can I just add? So, just so you guys know, it's written differently in the conditions for each applicant. Yours specifically says before 50 homes are constructed in Maple Mountain Estates and Canyon Vista Estates, and yours just says in the development. So I don't know if that matters, if the wording is not even the same, and if those two wordings mean 2 different things. We probably need to fix that.
And I get the fact that you're working together, I get the fact that you have to, but this is a legal document and we need to make sure that it's spelled out. So I'm just trying to make it so it doesn't become a
It
problem.
was a little confusing in the DRC meeting, and I talked specifically with the engineering department about that, and what the criteria is, just to clarify, because it was a little confusing. It wasn't super clear what that meant on the 50 homes, because it was said, at 2 different times it was said differently, like it isn't, like
Yeah.
same in this meeting, it was the same exact thing.
David, it looks,
So I went back to engineering and clarified.
Julie had a comment.
I know in the final plats on other projects I've done in Spanish Fork, it would just be part of the bonding, right, Dave? Like where we have to bond for all the off-site. That would just be, like, if that was Plat A, part of the bonding would be to connect 100 north, just part of the final and bonding amount.
Like with the off-site sewer that we've talked about,
Yeah.
anything like that, yeah.
I'm just thinking like
That's what
White
it would
Rail
be.
specifically, I mean, we had to do a ton of off-site, ton of improvements. And that was just part of the bonding.
And at the point in time, and Commissioner Fallon's point is one that we always have to keep in mind. Sometimes plans fall through, but at the point in time that an applicant was to simply bond for the construction of those improvements, which typically wouldn't happen until the right-of-way's been acquired, then I think it becomes a non-issue for us even then. Should the applicant's plans fall apart, we have the wherewithal to go in and construct the improvement.
And
It's a non-issue.
And I can be honest, without saying names out there, there have been other developments, I'll just leave it at that, where people have said, upon phase 4, this must be done. Well, they just didn't do phase 4. And there are developments where people have done things where roads didn't get done or things didn't get built because they were based on the 51st home. Well, I just won't build the 51st home, then I don't have to build that road. So that's why we try to protect ourselves.
Brad, I just want to clarify, in our policy, in our construction centers, we do allow 50 homes. If they came in separately and one was not being done without the other, we wouldn't allow Mountain Mountain to go past 50 homes without a second access. So we know they're going to have one no matter what they do. And this North, they've got a.
I think it's just a matter of clarifying that condition that Tracy had pointed out, because I think the conditions listed in, that were approved by the DRC are different than the conditions that you suggested,
Correct.
so
Yeah.
we need to make sure we get that right.
And I guess to be clear, again, I don't think this is a real big deal.
No.
Well, it's probably a much bigger deal for them than it is for me.
But the
But
way
to
I,
be clear, just finish the thought really
yeah,
quickly.
sorry.
I think this connection is really, really important. I mean, the concerns that we've talked about here, they're real. Like I've said, whether these developments happen or not, that's still gonna get worse. But anything that we can do to help mitigate that, I think is good. So I'd much prefer to see that connection made sooner than later. And that's partly,
Well, but I think the way I first read that, when I first read the condition of approval that it has to be completed before this development and Canyon Vista Estates reaches more than 50 homes, that means total between the two of them. That's the way I read that.
and that is my intent with how that's worded.
So
That's
25, you're saying 25 in each development then,
Or
not,
49 in one, which is Dean's point.
right?
One developer conceivably could get out ahead.
So is it?
Jared
is
has
it-
commented 50 in each, and so,
Right, so, and Jared's talking about a standard that in my view, I mean, that's the standard that we can't violate, that's the law in the
Right.
city. And I'm just gonna say this and then fade into the woodwork, because again, I don't, whether it's 50 individually or together, I don't think it really is probably gonna have much impact as we go forward. But I think this is maybe a case where being more stringent than what our ordinance typically would call for. It's a master plan development, both of these.
and I think the reason why is because we had opened up a little while ago is we are building in farmlands. And the
One way
roads,
To help alleviate the problems that we have with infrastructure deficiencies are improvements like these, yeah.
And just one more comment. I think one of the things too, I think that we're trying to be, as cooperative as possible is, the two accesses is typically adequate in this, but it's and we agree, it's a great connectivity to get over to the other side, and we kind of feel like we're stepping up to make that connection and adding more than what the requirement would be just to be a better area and open that up. And I think, like you said, Julie and I both met with the person on the end. I think it's all gonna work out, and that's, sewer comes in for the lower subdivision there. Sewer's coming from my subdivision for that, so it's much better for them to start at that end, their entrance to that end.
Makes sense.
But then again, you never know, if that has to be a city issue where we gotta have your help in acquiring it, if for some reason that goes south, then the time of that, that could take a while to go through that city process to do that. That's kind of some of the things that are weighing that issue there.
So can I ask my commissioners, does it make sense to say 25 in each, so that at least it's not 49 in one? You know what I mean? Does that make sense to limit it to 25 in each? Does that seem reasonable, Dave?
it just seems like we're putting the burden on them versus from our perspective, it should be collective because it's a risk or it's a number.
Mhm.
So you're saying,
From our
not to say
perspective,
25 or 25, but just say a total of 50?
I think so. Because we're looking at it from the total traffic, total volume. We don't particularly care. We don't care if it's fair between the two. We're looking at it from total volume, right? So.
And can I use, I mean, just another thing that, and this is just wording, I guess, but when you say 2 access points, if they connect those those roads right there, that creates 2 access points.
That makes, yeah.
So I mean, according to ordinance, they're not breaking anything. I mean, this is already in addition to.
So
This
you're,
subset right here has 98 units in it, so if he started per se, he would only get halfway down before he has to do this somehow.
Right, but I'm just saying I mean, that's another point, is that it's a third access. Right.
This is third access.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, you're looking at total project, though. We're looking at separate. So it'd be the third access if you're combining the two.
Which
We have to look at-
wording?
Theirs are there before I can go past.
But they're 2 different master or preliminary plats, though.
And if they do start here first, then all concerns.
Yeah, I think we're splitting hairs. I think it's
Yeah, I think
okay.
so.
I feel we're splitting hairs, and it seems like the staff's okay, developer's okay. So I think we're all right. I mean, it's a good discussion, but I think ultimately, when it's all said and done, I think that seems like if staff doesn't have any concerns and the applicants are okay with it, seems like then I think we're okay, and I don't know that we need to modify it, from my opinion. Anybody else feel otherwise?
I guess I just want to make sure that from our previous approval, that what we used as language was the language from the recommendation from staff, not necessarily the DRC recommendations, because that's what's different is between those two, right?
Yes,
Okay.
so it's a matter of just how you want to word it in.
So all I did is just said,
Okay.
Per what's listed by staff.
So we could
So
change
it's
it.
not the DRC recommendation, but the staff recommendation at the end of the report that we would use as the basis of our conditions. I hope I'm not confusing.
When you say staff and DRC, in essence, are the same.
With the exception,
Well,
of, as I understand it, you want condition number 7 changed.
No, I think we'll leave condition 7 the way you've got it written, that it's a total of 50 between the two. So this development and Canyon Vista Estates reaches more than 50 homes, so.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
No, well, we talked about it, so you were right, but I think in the end. So I'll make a motion with regards to the Canyon Vista Estates, that we recommend approval of the preliminary plat based on the findings listed in the staff report and the conditions 1 through 9 also listed in the staff report as recommended, not by what was approved in DRC, but what was recommended by the staff report.
I have a motion by Commissioner Fallon. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second.
Sorry, no, there's 11.
Okay. Why do I only have 9?
Are you looking at the old one still?
You're looking at the Maple Mountain.
Switch over.
I've done the
Maybe
same
it's
thing
to-
about 3 times tonight.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for bailing me out. Okay, so 1 through 11.
That's what.
13 DRC, 11 staff.
So let's go ahead and just make mention that a correction to your original, and then,
So I'll amend my motion that it's items 1 through 11 in the staff report.
now do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And we have a second by Commissioner Tagg. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good discussion. All said and done. I think it's good discussion, no changes, so thank you for the public for participating in that. And we will move ahead to the Parkview Townhomes.
turn things over to the applicant here in just a second. Um, Start a few different ways. And I think it's important even just to talk about our ordinances without even really considering this project, at least first. So by way of a little bit of background, we can drive around Spanish Fork today and see a few projects where townhomes, for example, are still under construction. Developments where, for the most part, as part of a bigger development, we've allowed for people to do some multifamily kind of construction under provisions that previously were included in our master plan development part of the code. And Commissioner Wilkinson, you're gonna have to bear with me here. I'm guessing I'm sure this won't make a lot of sense at the onset. But in short, we have a mechanism to approve developments that gives developers some flexibility in terms of how they arrange lots, how, in some cases, even how they arrange different housing types. So that, for example, in a project called just Maple Mountain, not Maple Mountain Estates, like what we just talked about, to be too confusing here, over by the Sierra Bonita Elementary School, if you're familiar with where that is. The land that's immediately north of Sierra Bonita and the townhomes that are across the street to the south of Sierra Bonita, that's all part of one big residential development. And in that case, what the developer basically did is developed some larger lots north of Sierra Bonita and consolidated some density from that part of the project into the townhome area to the south. So that all in all, that project didn't exceed a certain density, even though part of the development's pretty dense and another part of the development's not so dense. And under some provisions that we used to have in our master plan development ordinance, developers could do that. They could get some bonus density for doing things like building parks or having great architecture and things like that. And in short, we changed that program last spring. And I think that has been a good step for us. But when we made that change and took the opportunity for applicants to have bonus density included as part of a project's approval, simply meaning that they could have more units in a development when they did certain things, it made it such that today the highest density that's allowed per our ordinance is about 5.5 units per acre. And we don't have a mechanism for somebody to go above that. Whereas before, somebody could do as many as 12 units to the acre. You might remember that last spring, for example, we approved a project called The Ridge, a townhome development just east of the 2550 East Canyon Road intersection. It was about 11 or so units to the acre, and that was done under the previous master plan development provisions that we had in place. When we made that change, I think we recognized we might not have talked with the commission a lot about it, but we realized then, and as staff, we have dealt with some other developers in town that are talking about maybe even trying to do a little bit higher density than what we had allowed before, kind of the 12 units to the acre. And we've talked about developing a new zone. It's very common for cities simply to have a multifamily zoning district that deals with things like condominium and apartment type of developments. And in all candor, we'll talk more with the city council about that concept in January. We'll talk more with you guys about that concept in January. And that's something that's been on our plate for several months now. We simply just haven't gotten to the point to where we put the effort into getting it ready for you guys to consider a specific zone that would spell out some rules that would be in place should somebody want to do simply a higher density project today. It also would establish the parameters by way of how many units to the acres allowed. Maybe how much park space do you need if you're going to have a certain density and some different things like that. Most communities in Utah County today have a specific zoning district for that type of development. And maybe just by way of a plug, when I came to work for Spanish Fork 9 or so years ago, there were just about 20,000 people in the community. Here pretty soon we're gonna hit 40. We continuously hear, not that this needs to be the deciding factor for the types of land uses that we allow or not, but we hear from very, very credible sources that there's a very strong demand for a higher density residential kind of land use that today we simply don't permit. So that'll be part of the context that I'll use when I talk to you about adopting some zoning provisions that maybe would allow for that. But with that said, today we're in a situation where we're working on a few different projects. Some of them we've been working on for a while, where applicants would like to do townhomes. We'll talk about just a couple of them tonight. We have an applicant here tonight that's made a formal application for a zone change to be able to do a specific townhome project in the city. We have another one that we received just last week as well. And we want to get your thoughts on really 3 things that pertain to either changing our ordinance and or simply proceeding with these projects as infill overlay projects. We adopted several years ago a mechanism to allow for parts of, it was intended really to work for parts of the original platted blocks of the city, square, rectangular street, or the part of the community has just the square blocks. Where by and large, they're deep lots, and occasionally some development potential that's a little atypical from what you typically get in a nice greenfield kind of an area. So we adopted a zoning district that would allow for somebody to be able to have quite a bit of flexibility in how they design a development, with the idea that if they can design it so that it really fits in with the particular neighborhood that it's in, then the Planning Commission and City Council have the opportunity to review it and decide if they feel like it's the right thing or not. As the city attorney and city manager and I met to talk about a couple of the projects that we'll look at tonight, we felt and feel like using the infill overlay zone as a way to consider approving these projects perhaps is a good tool to use, and maybe not just for now, but into the future, based on a couple of criteria that we can talk a little bit more about. But with that said, again, I want to talk about some of our existing zoning standards, the idea of maybe either needing to adopt a new zoning district or using our infill zoning provisions to consider these 2 projects. There are a couple of minor details, maybe shouldn't say minor to me, they're minor details relative to the infill overlay zone that I think we'd want to talk about if you think that's something worth considering here. But anyway, that's kind of the background.
I was just going to say, so if I'm understanding what you're saying, I'm seeing a project go up in the Springville area on North Main, in Spanish Fork. So what you're indicating is we don't have a zone right now that would allow that type of building in Spanish Fork.
That's an excellent example, and that's right.
Okay. But we have had in the past, right? Because I've seen some high-density housing previously that's been done. Not maybe that high, but...
That's correct as well. Yep, we have allowed for
And
that.
so we pulled away from that at some point, and now you're taking a look at that to say, should we have a zone available where we can put some high density similar to that project out there?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So with that said, Mr. Adams is here. He's working on a project that D.R. Horton worked on a couple of years ago. Bruce and I had a chance to talk about this a little bit a few weeks ago.
This has already come across us a few years back.
Yeah,
And
so
it was denied.
I almost want to, it didn't get denied.
I think so.
It died before the plan, or before the city council considered it.
They'll deny it at the commission.
Exactly, and we need to talk a little bit more about that, and let me do that before Mr. Adams makes a presentation, but, the planning commission made a recommendation for the project to be denied because of a design issue on Volunteer Drive.
Saturation.
There's a density concern too.
Density concern. We went through and did a research of all of this style of housing on this side of this part of town and felt that there wasn't a need for additional density on this part of town that met this. So it was a density issue.
That's a very fundamental question. Honestly, I remember things differently. But that's exactly what we're here to talk about. In order for this project to be approved, one of two things would have to happen. Well, no, take it back. Several different things would have to happen, but, and let me just start by saying, if you feel like the design that they're gonna talk about tonight is not something that you feel comfortable approving, then let's talk about that. This is not before you guys for actual consideration, but I think the applicant would appreciate getting that kind of immediate feedback tonight, versus a couple of months from now after they've invested more time and effort in the project. From my perspective, the concern that we had with the plan that D.R. Horton seemed to cling to for a really long time was simply how it looked from Volunteer Drive. We worked through a number of other issues. They were reluctant to make some changes. I'll let Mr. Adams talk about the design that they have to present now. But again, if density's the fundamental issue here, then
I didn't have problems with density design issues.
yeah, and maybe it's appropriate just to have the discussion take a different direction from what I anticipated. If you guys have significant concerns, let's talk about those, and we can just kind of move on from there. But in fairness to Mr. Adams, I think it'd be good to give him a minute or two to talk about what he has in mind.
We had came in previously, and then I'll get Mr. Adams, to come up. But we had come in and pulled how many zones were in that area and how many different housings in the area. And I remember their discussion about the different parts of the city, and I just think that there's a lot of housing already in the area that is not even full. I mean, you talked about the condos on the south side of Sierra Bonita, they're half empty. I mean, there's a lot of condos in the city that are not full, and I just think we have enough of this style without building more. And then there was also an additional discussion about mixed use, and the vision that we had for the mixed use is more commercial than residential. Now, it's been vacant fields for, what? Well, forever, but since this has been developed, the last 15 years or so. And I think there's been other visions there than residential.
That's absolutely another wrinkle to the discussion, mixed use and what that means here, and those types of
I
things.
think we left it mixed use, so we had some options.
And that's exactly how
When
I
we,
view it.
when we
Yeah.
adapted the general plan changes, we wanted to have some options.
I think there's two different ways to look at the idea of mixed use, though, and Dave, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but, there's the true mixed use where you in a traditional urban setting where you've got retail or office or something, kind of a commercial use below with, residential use above. So it's truly, interspersed mixed use. But I think, if I understand correctly, the mixed use designation that's currently in the city isn't necessarily to say on a piece of property you have to have retail and residential, but that it provides for the ability to have retail or residential. Is that how I understand the mixed use concept?
That's how I look at it, just like Commissioner Gonzalez said. I think it's really to give you and the city council, as well as an applicant, a lot of latitude in terms of what you consider.
So what we're saying for this property is that it may not having it all residential is a perfectly feasible option for something in a mixed use.
That is how I look at it.
But I think it, you know, that obviously it's somewhat subjective. Other people might view it differently.
But what it doesn't define is the density of the mixed use.
Fairly significant wrinkle. Yeah, it doesn't define it. So I mean, you could, from either direction.
All right, let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Adams. How are you today, sir?
Good.
Good.
David Adams, I represent the developer. Not quite exactly sure how to go with this because I see that you have some concerns that I really hadn't focused on and addressed. So why don't I just barely touch on what I was going to show you about the plan, and then perhaps talk just a little bit about the use of the property and what may be even more appropriate.
Just to refresh my memory, did you represent the developer the first time this came around a couple years ago? Okay, I didn't know if it was the same,
No, it's different.
so totally different development. Applicant, is the applicant different or same as well?
The applicant is different.
Okay. I wasn't
sure if it
was the same situation.
The applicant's different, although we did start with what they had
Okay.
and try to resolve the deficiencies and the problems that got them into trouble and got them halfway through. And so a couple of the things that we have done, as Dave mentioned, is, you know, there was a real concern about driveways facing Volunteer Drive, just to look at the streetscape. And so working with Arrive Homes, we've come up with a product that has a rear entry, and so that the front of the units can face Volunteer and be a much nicer look, a much better layout, particularly from the street. So as you drive by, you see really the fronts of the homes. Another thing we did is we've increased the width of each unit so that by 2 feet, to give it a little more space, a little more area for adornment, and feel like it feels like it's a more spacious product. The front doors aren't so close together. Another one of the kind of the sticking points, and I don't know if this got to your level or not, but was over the purchase of the city property. There's a little rectangular piece fitting right in there. It's kind of a leftover from the ballpark. And we've worked out a formula that I feel is going to be fair, where we will step up and actually purchase that from the city and make it part of our project. And I understand that the last applicant was not willing to do that. Now, looking at it from a little bit bigger picture, maybe you could just kind of show the area plan a little bit. One of the, I understand the issue about mixed use and there being, you know, perhaps there's enough of this product in the area, but I want to make 2 points about that particular issue. One of them is that one of the market segments that we see that is undersupplied in the market in general and even in Spanish Fork is the single adult market. There's one of the fastest growing home buyers today are people in the age of their 40s and 50s that are single. They may have one older child or may not have any children. They're working, they're active, and a home, the large single-family attached home doesn't work for them any longer. They want something that is upgraded, very nice, maybe gourmet kitchens, internet, workspace. They want a nice place to live that can congregate with other singles and they're not worried about gardens, they're not worried about on-site amenities or tot lots. They'd really like to have, their amenities are the city, the restaurants, the linkages to other cities and to other peoples. And this is part of this market that we would like to go after with this. Yes, we will get young couples. Yes, we will get people just out of college starting their family. But we also will have upgrades and packages that will hit these single adults and older people. The other thing, you know, talking about this particular piece of property, one of the things I want to just point out is we did try to make it mixed use and that this will be commercial. But in working with this, you know, having it, if it were single family, there's a lot of rough areas right around in here that don't lend itself to a traditional subdivision.
Are you
referring to rough as in cosmetic?
Yes. Yeah, just the types of uses that are back in here.
Audibly too, isn't it? Isn't that pretty a noisy use? back
It's,
there?
it's industrial,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's industrial. And we've taken some great lengths to do some screening and other things in here, but thinking that this type of density and this type of product might be very appropriate as a transition from what we see here to the single family and larger detached homes that are over in that area. So those are kind of some of the thoughts we have, and that's the direction we've been going with this. We do obviously want your feedback as to whether this is appropriate or not. This layout here is just right around 9 units to the acre. So it's not approaching the 12 units or 10 or 12 units that you'd typically see in a townhome. But we feel like it has a good transition to what's existing there. And we also feel that it can meet a market segment that's not being met very well at this time.
You said market segment not very met very well. That would kind of answer my density question. It seems like there's an abundance of it, so why are we feeling differently?
I really haven't seen that. There's a little project up here that's just getting finished, of new townhomes. They've done fairly well. And I'm not really familiar with another new one. There's probably some existing projects out there, existing homes, but I don't know of another new one in this quadrant.
When you say quadrant, this part of town is what you're referring to? I would agree with that, in that part of town. I'm just saying, I'm referring to the whole town.
The whole town.
We just recently approved one similar, can't remember the name of the development, between Highway 6 and Canyon Road up on 2550 East,
The Ridge, yeah.
the Ridge.
Jesse
So,
River.
yeah, so how many homes is that one we approved? That's about 100 of them in there, isn't it?
Probably closer to 200.
Yeah, so we just, they're kind of springing up around, which emphasizes, I guess there's a demand for it if people are building them, but it just seems like we get too many.
If you look at this as mixed use, I don't know what kind of, I'm not sure what type of mixed use would fit in this area. I think putting commercial over in here next to the detached homes, the single-family homes, might create some kind of concern. It's possible. I'm not sure what would fit in there. And as you get in over here, it doesn't really have the traffic that you have up and down Main Street like you'd like to see for commercial or even office buildings. So I don't know what else really would work well for this piece. This landowner's been trying to sell his parcel now for about 3 or 4 years, and we're just trying to come up with
Read
something that
the
is
speed
good.
limit on this road's only 25, but Jared, this is your expertise, but was that runway driveway right there too close to this blind corner? They're coming around that corner?
No,
No?
just from first look, it should be fine. It's close.
Okay.
We have made application under the infill overlay with an R3 zone.
Would you consider, just as a way as keeping this area, I don't know if you can go out, but would you consider allowing some type of a trail system through the development? Because there's a lot of kids that walk between this ballpark and this ballpark.
There is one.
It's already existing.
Yeah, it comes down behind.
Right now it's a road. No, right now it's a field. They walk right through there.
I'd say that trail that he's pointing out right there is already in.
Where's the bridge for the canal?
Right now they walk through the field though. They don't.
Where are they coming from?
I see what you're saying.
There's a ball field right here.
Ball field here, and they come through there? Surely,
Walk straight through here to this ball field.
surely there's got to be something we can put here. That will not be a busy street here. I wonder if we could figure out.
Trail that maybe goes right on the backside, that they can come right on that road and cross across.
Mhm.
I mean, it wouldn't be part of the official trail program, but I can just tell you that kids right now walk straight across that field all summer long.
Well, we
Because
want
what
them to
happens
be
is
safe.
this right here is This ball field over here is like the 5 to 14-year-olds, and this is the, 12 to 18-year-olds. So mom and dad are always going back and forth, and I have firsthand knowledge of that. And when you have siblings here and siblings here, and they're running back and forth, and
We're certainly willing to open that, create something that provides a passage through there.
Maybe I make a quick comment too, just on, planning again. We talk about need or whatever that is. I think you'll notice with the economies how it works. I mean, I built the Black Horse Run subdivision over in one part of town, and a bunch in Orem, and I did a lot of townhomes over the years. And it seems like as affordability starts to wane, these really, it's a place where these young couple, your kids, my kids, newlyweds, some of the single, but he's talking about that those people, it's
demographics.
the demographics of that. This becomes even more, I think as I'm looking at the economy and the market we are looking at as of today, which can change obviously. If you'll see Orem and Lehigh, these, even high-rise apartment buildings and condominiums. If you go over by Geneva Road, those things are going up like crazy because of that. The affordability is just harder and harder to hit. So, not that this is necessarily affordable housing is going to be nicer units, but just in the demographics of, I think that's what those infield pieces.
Well,
and what-
I appreciate the time you've made to look at the old stuff and the new stuff and make some revisions as well. Some of the look reminds me of what you're seeing on the River Road on the north side of, down by the golf course. There's a few right along the trail, or the
That's
River Bottom Road on the north side there.
Yeah, well, you guys might remember, we use that as staff as an example of how we wanted this project to be designed with the fronts facing the road like they do on River Bottom Road, instead of the way that D.R. Horton had it designed. So I think that's a great example we use of what we're talking about.
And the pictures that you saw there were the project in Provo that we did at the S curve of the freeway on the east side there. But Independence Avenue is the same type of road, type of area. This would not be good to have garage. You just don't want garages facing that road. I think you're looking at the same thing with, I look at it with Volunteer Drive. It's the same look that just.
Does the city get commission for the people on that first, because they're gonna have aerial view of the fireworks, so they should get like compensated for it?
We're going to sell that as an amenity.
We were gonna put a thing in that, the balconies that would, on certain days that,
Yeah.
they have to give those up to the city guys.
You know how we say like mountain view or lake view? This is firework view.
There you go.
So if I can make a few points from my perspective, I don't have an issue with the density. I actually think it's a good part of the town for it to happen. I think it provides a good transition from the busy main street of, the Spanish Fork to the single-family residences that are further west. So that, to me, I don't have an issue with. I think, if there's a saturation in the community for this type of product, that's your risk, not mine. I think it's an appropriate, and, whether the timing is right that's, like I said, that's your risk. I do wish that the units that are still, we've talked about the units up against Volunteer Drive, and you use the example, or we talked about the example of the ones up by the golf course. That relationship is a pretty nice, comfortable relationship, whereas I still feel like these are still pushed pretty far back. So I don't know what the dimension of it is, but
Can I clarify that?
sure.
Are you talking about the distance between? the
from
road?
here to there.
We want to push those forward.
Okay.
But and I've asked my engineer about that, because we have that feeling too. When you come across there, it's kind of nice to have those up, and it just feels walkable. But there is quite a large easement right through there, some utilities. So we'll push them up as far as we can, but
Okay.
we feel the same way you do. We're limited by some existing utility.
Well, and one of the things I think that does, the impacts it does, is if we're worried about traffic coming through here, and, it helps slow, it helps calm it, yeah. Yep, exactly, so. And even these units here on the end, it would be really nice to not have the shoulder facing the, some way of, we've designed units ourselves that have, these 4 units face that direction and this unit actually faces that direction. I think that's an appropriate way if you can consider that as a part of what you do there. It just helps, you basically you have nothing going on until you hit this point here, and then you have something interesting going on. And so I think it would help that introductory element, so.
Particularly the sight line as you come down, look straight into this way. One of the things, it was on my point sheet, I didn't address it, but we have given that a lot of thought. And there's got to be ways that we can dress up the sides of these homes too, with windows, with other kind of detailing and features, so you are not looking, you're not looking at a flat wall. It was actually on my point sheet, and I failed to say it.
Just got to make sure that the stairs are interior on the bearing wall.
Yeah.
I've made that mistake, so.
Good point, thank you.
I don't have the code in front of me as well, but there was at one time discussion 20 years ago on the old Hillman Fields. Not Hillman Fields, what's the old one? Huh?
Hellman Field.
Hilton Basin. What's the one, the other one?
Swenson.
Swenson, sorry. On the Swenson Fields, because of the residents around it, the lights had to be out by 10. And at this ball field, they don't have to be out till 11 because it wasn't around housing. So I'm hoping that because if we allow this, that now the lighting doesn't have to change. And I don't know if that's, I don't even know if it's factual. I haven't read the lighting code or whatever, but the old ball fields, the lights had to be turned off at 10 because of the housing around it.
I'm not familiar with that either. I can swear I've been there nights where we've had games that have gone past at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I agree.
But that, ultimately that would be for the city council to decide. I don't know of an ordinance that we have.
I just wouldn't want it to affect it, is what I'm saying.
Well, and, we're here tonight to get your feedback. You're not necessarily here to listen to me, but part of the reason that I feel like this is an appropriate site for this kind of land use is that it's right across the street from a big regional park like what we have. I think you can do some things with these kind of units to help mitigate the impact that the activities and different things from the property to the south have on that property, as well as with industrial uses there, like Mr. Adams pointed out, to the north, the retail uses that are adjacent to it there on the east, things that you can't do as well with another land use.
Do you have any concern with thousands of kids and adding all this? I mean, you're talking lots more traffic with just that right there coming in and out of here. And I mean, I was wondering, can this go all the way down and access on the road down here? I mean, so that not everything's on Volunteer Drive?
Signal on the one that comes through here.
Yeah, it has a signal there, and I'm not sure you want to
Well,
people around big streets.
Well,
Just from-
that's a school property right there, right?
From my perspective on that, one of the things that oftentimes, frankly, makes it hard politically to get a multifamily development approved, it's objections that you get from neighbors that are concerned about traffic. One of the things about this site that I think is a strength in that respect is that you don't have traffic going through another neighborhood. Traffic goes immediately out to the collector class Volunteer Drive. So in that respect, I think it's ideal. Now, relative to the concern of would these, however many dwelling units, put us near a tipping point relative to capacity on Volunteer Drive, I've just kind of been going through my head. I mean, the Spanish Trails development that was built by Fieldstone to the west, I think all of their phases probably total about 1,000 homes. River Cove, several hundred homes. There are probably a couple of thousand dwelling units over there. I think it's kind of part of what you're saying, relative to we have a lot of housing in that part of the community. But given the traffic, obviously, that's already being generated, the additional traffic that would come from these units, I think, is negligible. Or maybe that's not fair to say, but it's not going to be substantial. And that, is just how I look at it.
seems like to me the other ones with the collector routes are on other roads, because they're going out on 200 South, right, or first South?
Well, yeah, I'm sure traffic obviously gets dispersed onto a few different routes that we have.
That's only
Over there, but-
takes forever to change.
Volunteers, it's a pretty good route.
I mean, is it something, Jared, that engineering should require of these guys to study the level of service at that intersection based on the impact for these 132 units? I mean, I'm not worried about volunteer drive. I don't think volunteer drive is an issue, but I think, like you said, the wait time at that intersection, at that light. I mean, I've got kids that play soccer, and so we're down there all the time, and, you know. No, but you're not joking. It's true, though.
The signal can be timed and adjusted.
So how does this density work with the infrastructures that are available down there right now?
I'll let Jared answer that, I think.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm just talking about the density of the homes in there and how that fits with what's available as far as power and sewer and water and all of that.
Yeah, we're fine there.
Okay.
So. The sewer trunk line actually runs, the actual major utilities actually run through this property, so they have to move some of them.
That's another issue that would make commercial development here really kind of difficult. There's like 3 or 4 different utility lines running right through it. Water and high pressure gas line. It's a hard site to lay out.
So I kind of have a question along those lines. When we approved the Ridge development over by Highway 6, that was the first time that I recall, since I've been serving on the planning commission, learning about multi-use properties. And you, Dave, had talked to us about the area to the west of that, which is all fields right now, and how that was a multi-use transitional area. And how it could be, that was something for us to think about. How would we develop multi-use areas? Where would the commercial be? And where would the residential be? And what kind of residential? And I think we all agree this is the right kind of residential. But I remember thinking at that time, I hope we have a chance to discuss the general plan before we have to make that decision. Because I just feel like this is setting the precedence of where that commercial and residential transition happens. And so I just sort of feel like I would like more, and maybe you two could provide the information that I would like to understand. Just where is that division? When do you say it's not good enough for commercial, it's time to start the residential? I mean, I was wondering maybe, where's the Wendy's? Where's the Wiggy Wash in that picture? I just kind of wondering where they are. Is that very current?
Isn't that Wiggy Wash there?
There's Wiggy Wash, yeah.
And then Wendy's is down here.
And then there's the
Yeah.
vacant field between Wendy's and this one.
So, I mean, that's just a question, and that's just something I have on my mind. I really would like to consider just what's the precedence we're setting here as far as that goes, since there's going to be other areas in our communities where we're going to be making these same decisions.
It's all this.
And yeah, I ask myself the same question all the time when people come in and ask about having the zoning changed of a piece of property that, as I see it, I wonder if at some point in the future, somebody could make it work for some kind of professional office use or retail use. Because frankly, we have so much land in the community still. Obviously, it's limited. Someday it will be exhausted, but we have an ample supply of acreage for residential development in the city. There are only so many sites that are going to work for non-residential uses, though, and I think we need to be very, very careful about preserving those. And sometimes it's painful. You have property owners that, by way of the evolution, residential land uses, I think, almost all the time are economically viable before non-residential uses. Just kind of how we evolve and grow as communities. So sometimes you have to delay property owners' plans and things when you want to hold out and reserve sites for retail use or some other non-residential thing. My question with this property here, though, is just really whether ever anybody realistically can foresee a time to where it would have any non-residential value. I don't know, but we've talked now with, for a while, it was a very reputable developer in the valley, PEG Development, about the prospect of doing kind of a combination residential, commercial development here. But it was laid out frankly in a very similar way to what we're seeing now, to where it was only the frontage on Main Street that was really commercial, and everything to the west was basically commercial. Obviously, we're talking with Mr. Adams now about it. We've talked with D.R. Horton. We've talked with enough different people who I think have really studied the prospect of having a commercial element on the western part of this project.
I do know that.
Yeah, and they simply haven't been able to make it work.
Along with that, because I know that the vision was to make this a kind of a commercialize and clean up the southern part of our city, just like we are doing development in the north and
Right.
on the east side of town. And, you know, by doing this, and I agree with you that it's, you know, the comment was made by Mr. Adams that, you know, it's a difficult piece of property with other things that are in there, and then, you know, commercially, because of the shape and the, it might be the best.
You can't see, I wish, maybe we could turn on the utility layer and see where everything goes.
But, you know, once if this is a decision we make, this plan of making that commercial southern part of town is changing.
We do plan for a significant chunk out there in front that can help to upgrade what you have down there.
I mean, part of the upside when you're trying to convince somebody, just wait a little longer and see if something can develop with some kind of retail use or something, is that, you know, you're usually talking about a 4 or 5 or more multiplier in terms of a property's value if it can be developed commercially. So there's that incentive for property owners to maybe forego a faster return and to wait. And certainly I think, as we've talked, and as we talked with D.R. Horton, I don't want to speak for you, but you see value in leaving the property adjacent to Main Street, obviously, open for non-residential development.
That's a 1.6 acre parcel. It's gonna be nice. And we've had some interest in it.
Slow down, you put too many utilities in there.
Well, I know there,
It is there growing.
Somebody's having fun.
I would also ask if, and since it's just a discussion, as, I guess, when I look at mixed use, maybe some variables within the project. It looks like by the plan that you have proposed, that it's very similar. I know that one that we looked at up top, was it Jesse's project, what's it called?
The Ridge.
The Ridge. We had actually, I know out of 180 units, there is various sizes within that unit. So I know that there was about 30 of them that were, I don't know, just this is as an example, in the, say, the 250 range, and then there's another 30 that were in the 200 range, and then there was another 100 that were in that 150 range as far as price points. So within a development, there was also, because it's not all one R12, R15, et cetera, because it mixed use, it allowed him to make various size homes within the same area. So he looked at
We're
it.
still studying that, and of course, we always want to get as much market as we can, as broad a market as we possibly can. So we have not decided exactly on a product yet. A little bit premature for that. Want to make sure we're going in the right direction first. But
If you're really tailoring to that demographic that you had referred to earlier, you know, having different price points might be something that draws people to the
we
development.
will get that young couple, and we'll get that older. And generally, what we'll do is we'll offer different kinds of packages, like a gourmet kitchen package, or, you know, the upgraded internet sound package that
Firework
that
view.
elevate, the fireworks, that elevate those for, so they still remain fairly small and affordable. But, you know, there are people who choose to live in a smaller home without any work, particularly in that segment.
And one of the things that I would, since a discussion of what works, what doesn't, I think the discussion needs to be with our Parks and Recreation, if that's an area that they would consider for expansion. I know that there's people that would look at, you know, a lot of the cities around here have done larger pools, and, you know, do we have vision of expanding a water park or a pool in the future? And I know there's been requests for ice skating rinks and different things besides baseball fields and soccer fields in Spanish Fork. And if Spanish Fork City does look at development of their Parks and Recreation, is this a piece of property that we would be willing to give up? Now, not that we own it now, but give up
Purchase, maybe. You're saying
to purchase or to give up to a residential,
Yeah.
because this is something that, this is a recreational area, and if the city has a plan of potentially growing parks and recreation, this could be an ideal area that we might not want to give up or rezone to residential.
Parks and underground utilities work great together. That's
So
pretty,
I
it's in between two parks. I mean, certainly,
So before this decision would be made, I think a discussion would need to be made with Parks and Recreation, is, does it fit in their future plan as well?
fortunately, I can get that answer pretty quickly, I think.
I like the idea. I would think that there's a few questions to be made and what others, but I don't, does anybody have any other feedback they'd like to give to the discussion?
I don't want to get sucked into details beyond what's needed, but back to the idea that if we move forward, like I mentioned, Mr. Adams, you know, like he mentioned, he's made application to have this approved as an infill overlay project. And even now, as I read again through tonight, the description that we have in the zoning ordinance of the infill overlay zone, and I can say, as one of the guys that helped write this, this really was not the kind of property that we envisioned the infill overlay zone being applied to. But looking at it and looking at what we were trying to accomplish with it, it seems like a pretty good fit. However, there are a couple of things I appreciate you bringing up: volunteer drive and that setback. The infill overlay zone requires a 20-foot setback adjacent to a public street or even a shared driveway. I think that's probably counterproductive here. So I wonder if that's something that isn't worth adjusting in our language. So I absolutely believe that how that street gets framed, and this is back to the argument that we went through before, that's what we're after. It's a big deal. And the other issue with this, right now we're in infill overlay zone, limits the number of units that you can have in a building to 4. Most of the townhome projects that are built throughout the valley, I think, period, that usually have, you know, something greater than that, maybe 6. So I wonder if that's also perhaps worth tweaking a little bit. I do have a concern about just tweaking that without having some catches involved, because I do not think that when somebody has a half-acre parcel, you know, maybe on the second north and second west block of town, that we want to see a sixplex there, for example. And I think with good reason, in order to fit within that context of a block where it's predominantly single-family homes today, we want to keep that building size in terms of number of units limited.
Scale and rhythm of the units match the scale and rhythm of the single-family residences around.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think we could probably do that with maybe some size, project size kind of thresholds.
Or unit for sizes greater than 3 acres or whatever, yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah,
what I have in mind.
okay.
So, if that's something that sounds like that can be workable,
we'll go ahead and propose some adjustments to the zone by way of ordinance amendments. We could bring those back to you guys in January for you to consider. I'm sure by then, Mr. Adams could have his plan refined a little bit, and we could just continue the discussion then. Incidentally, there's another project that's a good example of how we'd want to apply this. It's a little bit smaller. It's considerably smaller. It's about 2.5 acres. It's already zoned R3. It's up near Wendy's, just, in fact, east of it.
One that came in and we had the same discussion a few months ago.
About how the roads were designed in it. We
Mhm.
can talk about that,
Yeah, I think you
They
were
talk
you?
about flip-flopping the property and the road.
And I think they've adjusted the design. This is a new applicant as well. So the applicant that was looking at doing it before, they've abandoned the project. We're working with a new applicant, but the same issues come into play on it, and whether we consider it as an infill overlay development or something else.
And then, Mr. Adams, another thing that would be a deterrent for me from recommending to the city council would be additional parking so that there's nothing on the street. I think that volunteer drive, I don't know that it's red curb now, I think it says no parking on the street, but when you.
We did not intend to use volunteer drive as part of the requirement.
Okay, so just make sure that there's
Yeah.
adequate parking for additional in your design. Any other comments for the discussion here on Parkview Townhomes? So I would just ask, I guess, the staff that they would discuss with Parks and Recreation
Yeah,
if
it's a
this
great
property,
suggestion.
if this property is part of future plans before we move on there.
When does the recreation committee meet?
I don't know.
Tracy,
Mondays, I don't know, I
Are you
can't remember
still
if it was
on
the
it?
first, no, I got kicked off once I was on this one. They said you can't serve on 2 committees, that would be
said
like
that.
over. Anyway, I think it's first Monday of every, it's Mondays, I don't know.
So they may have met this week. But either way, we can get a response to that pretty quickly.
Thank you for coming and presenting to us, and I think that it helps us just get the ball rolling a little faster and easier, so.
Yeah, it's really helpful to us to be able to come in for a good discussion way up front.
So if there's not any other discussions, do we have a motion to close tonight's meeting? Jared has something? All right, so I think that the agenda for December 3rd has been met, and if I have a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion by Commissioner Fallon, and the meeting is closed. Thanks, everyone.